My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened Here Recently. Jason, this week I am pleased and a little bit sad to announce that Anglekite has wrapped up. I have been running this game for a very long time. We had 4 months of sessions, and then we had a bit of a break in the middle when I had some other stuff going on, and then we had a finale.
Cool. How did it go? Sounds like you enjoyed it.
I was very happy with how it went. I think that the Anglekite setting book is pretty good. It's a Chaos World setting book. One of 3. I haven't read the other 2, but if they are anything like this one, I am looking forward to trying them out sometime.
Kate's a big fan of the purple one. I can't remember the name of the purple one. I can't remember, but it's one of them. Yeah, she really loves that one. I think she's running that for her face-to-face group, and I'm really surprised by that because she's not a Dungeon World person, right? So that actually, I think that says something about the quality of the Chaos World books.
Yeah, they are very good. There was all kinds of material in it that I used pretty much word for word, or at least the ideas of it. And there were just a few things that I left out, and as the book encourages you to do that, make it your own. Take what you want and build on it and leave out what you're not interested in exploring. The setting book has a variety of fronts. I think I ran 5 or 6 of the fronts in the 4 months of play, and that was pretty aggressive, but it really added to some of the themes that I was interested in exploring, which were that this was a very dire situation, that it's the end of the world. Having such just pressing dramatic needs, the players were really having to take on challenges that were much, much bigger than maybe just a regular Dungeon World game would have. They were having to fight entities and monsters that were the stuff of legend. They were the kinds of things that people had been telling stories about since the beginning of time. And to interact on that epic of a scale was really, really satisfying, especially drawn out over so many sessions to see the build-up.
I'm curious. So you play a lot of Dungeon World with me, and my Dungeon World campaigns and adventures tend to be smaller in scope, right? I like a smaller location. I like smaller stakes. I just like a smaller, tighter kind of like adventure, I guess. Not like anything with huge epic implications, although I say that in the session we just finished, your character got killed by a god, so it's not always that way. But I'm curious, how did you find the system to be like Dungeon World? Because I think a lot of people don't know that it can be quite sturdy in both epic level play as well as the sort of more grounded smaller scope play. How did you feel about that? Smaller scale, I should say.
I think it held up very nicely. We had a lot of kind of back and forth with this, big ideas and then smaller goals to get to those big concepts that they're having to deal with. Of the first session that we ran, it was very small feeling, much more mundane. It was helping out this town with a problem of these feral vampires. But it escalated quickly when they started to find out the reason that the feral vampires were getting particularly rampant. But in those scenes, in those sessions, they were really having to deal with a troublesome cast of NPCs who were vampire hunters that just wanted to get the job done, and they weren't worried about moral qualms or anything like that, as long as they stopped the vampires. And that's a much more smaller in scope kind of problem. But it kind of started the whole thing going with, you're going to be dealing with small things to try and get big things done, but you're also going to be dealing with some, troubling ideas of, what is evil, what's evil in Anglekite? Are you willing to engage with it? What are you willing to get this job done? And then it escalated from there into different, much more ornate kinds of cities and settings where chiefly these were not combat adventures. There was combat, but they were not focused on combat.
Okay.
Definitely the most combative adventures were the last ones. The ones where they're going to probably the most bizarre locations, where they're going into the Tower of the Word Fae, where things can be created, and things were once created, but those Word Fae have disappeared from the earth, and they are trying to find this legendary weapon that is supposed to stop the apocalypse from happening, or cause it, depending on how you use it. And they were fighting through that tower, and fighting their enemies who had all gathered at that place to kind of fight over the weapon and determine what the fate of the world would be.
That's interesting. It sounds like it kind of built up to this, right? Like, it built up to this big, like, finale, this big finish, which I think is probably appropriate for this, right? I mean, that feels like how it should have gone, like, over the course of the campaign. It just kept getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I think that it escalated nicely. The fronts did a good job of doing that, and how I had the fronts pieced together in particular did a good snowballing. And when you would see just something that you have been dealing with and trying to fight, but then something else comes along and it is more terrifying than that. It was suitably epic in that regard.
So we've talked about this in bits and pieces in previous episodes. I'm curious how it was having different groups of player characters throughout this big arc. You talked about before how you would use questions to kind of hook new players into the world and and to get them invested in the setting. And I think that's super interesting. I just want to get your kind of big picture view on that. Like, would this have been better if you had the same group of people the whole way through? Or did having different groups of people bring something to it?
So fortunately, I did have the same body of people for a bulk of the sessions, which was helpful because they knew what was going on without it having to be kind of explained to them again. Because as each of these situations is unfolding, there's a little bit more lore to unpack. But that being said, there wasn't a problem incorporating new players as long as I had that core group. If I had entirely new players, I could do it, but I might be the only one enjoying the bigger overarching story because they might not see the pieces fitting together in the way that they were, unless I was taking great pains to unpack it for them.
Yeah, in We Hunt the Keepers right now, which is my campaign that I have going on, I have mostly just had you and Fraser as you are the two consistent players across the whole thing. Garrett a little bit. Garrett's been in quite a few of them, but I'm kind of just like trusting that this sort of weird nonlinear narrative structure I've chosen to go with for We Hunt the Keepers makes it easy to drop people in. That's my hope. Like, I hope they don't feel too out of water with it, and then again, I make the videos available too, so if somebody does want to catch up, if they do want the full story, they can just go get it. But I wonder about that though. Like, you're going to get a different kind of story if you have the same group versus like mixed group, but it sounds like you handled it pretty well.
Yeah, so I was very happy with the whole story that we told. I thought that we stuck the landing, which was something I was very worried about on something of this scale.
It's the worst, right? You dread it. You're like, oh God, it's been so good. I hope the landing, I hope we stick the landing. You always dread that, right?
Right.
But it's exciting too.
Right. And it was very exciting. We got to see this apocalyptic fight happen. And per the rules, there is a particular role that will happen that will determine kind of the outcome. And we did that. And I kind of put it on the players, like, if this works out, then you will get to narrate. If it doesn't work out, then you will get to narrate. And we'll just kind of epilogue from there, kind of what happens.
Nice. Love an epilogue. Epilogue is really powerful. We've talked about this before, I think on DR, maybe on the Gauntlet, I'm not sure. But you can use an epilogue to give people closure, right? Like, if we didn't get to every little bit of your story that you were angling for, you can set up an epilogue to where they get that. It's super powerful.
Right. So the chief epilogue here was, how does the world end? What?
That's good.
What did it mean for you? What did you see as the world crumbled around you?
Did we see like their little corner of the world or whatever? Like, is that how it worked?
There's only one place on Earth left. That's how apocalyptic this is. Like, there is the crater basin, and that is all that's left. There's several cities. It's a fairly big basin, but that's all there is at this point.
Well, it sounds like it was great fun.
That's all I really wanted to say about it. It was really, really good, and thanks to all my players for letting me be a part of that awesome story. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is, what should I be on the lookout for?
So, in the Gauntlet, we publish a zine called Codex. We've talked about it before. I'd like to mention specific issues that are coming out from time to time, especially if they have a lot of Dungeon World stuff. And the next one is Codex Crystal. It is loaded with Dungeon World stuff. So, if you are into this podcast, you're going to love this issue of Codex. We have 3 Dungeon World-centric features of the, I think, 6 features in this one, 5 or 6 features. The first is a kind of a set piece encounter type thing involving these knights who wear crystalline armor. Their crystalline armor is an outward manifestation of their ideology, which is very crystallized. They have a very fixed, unwavering sense of law and justice, and they're pretty tough characters. It comes with a nice little history of these knights. There are stats for the knights themselves if you want to encounter them. There are magic items associated with them. It's written by Ed Hickox, who's a new writer for Codex, but we have a few things coming from him down the pipe. He's really good. And then it features a beautiful piece of art by Claudia Cangini. The next piece is kind of a psychedelic piece about these stones, these gems that are sentient and are able to open up dimensional space and portals, and you can get one of these stones. It's called the Guardian Stones. You can get one of these stones and you can harness the various powers of these stones, but also you become somewhat subservient to the stone's desires, which are to basically explore extra-dimensional spaces and repair damaged extra-dimensional spaces. It's very psychedelic. It's very trippy, but it's pretty neat. It's basically just like a collection of magic items, essentially, kind of like specialized magic items. You might think of a good parallel would be like the Eon Stones from Dungeons and Dragons, like these stones that do these like real specific things and are like great items of power. This is kind of a similar idea. That's by Andrew Shields, who is a contributing author on Blades in the Dark, as well as he does some OSR stuff. And it features art by Ray Otis, who did a lot of the art for the Gauntlet throughout various things, including the logo for this show. And the third piece, the biggest piece, is called Trepolytic Parasites. And this is a front compendium class and monster collection involving these crystalline spores that infect people and turn them into a hive mind. And it's pretty cool. That one's by Matt Stewart and features art by Vandal Arden. David, you've had a chance to look at some of these things. What do you think?
I am a huge fan of the compendium class that comes in the last one that you were mentioning. That compendium class
sharp. Yeah.
is really good. It has some alternate ways of unpacking it for your players because it's not exactly compendium class that you necessarily want to have.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Doom Clock compendium class. I don't want to ruin it because it's pretty fun to read and discover on your own. But the whole Trepolytic Parasite set piece and package, I guess, is really fucking cool.
Yeah.
They're all good. All 3 of them are pretty neat. They all bring something different organized around this theme of crystals, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. The Guardian Stones are a very unique take on a way that you could do some more advanced levels of magic items and what their involvement could be.
Yeah, it leads to epic level play too. It's very like Planescape epic level kind of play that these stones kind of facilitate.
Definitely. But yeah, when I read that compendium class, my jaw dropped. So
yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's good. So listeners, if that's interesting to you and you haven't checked out Codex yet, I highly recommend it. Go to our Patreon, make a $4 pledge. It will be out August 1st.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be. Jason, a few weeks ago, we talked about a good way of getting your player characters who have not been in all the sessions up to speed and involved and integrated with the group through some different means. And I think this is another one for that, but this can be used for a variety of different situations.
Yeah, we talked about love letters, right? And I think what we're going to talk about today is something that you could even incorporate into your love letters, right?
Absolutely. This is something like one of 3 techniques that I would use to get players engaged with a group. And you can also use it to do some other stuff, which we'll talk about. But what we are talking about is allowing a player or a few players to have some free hold to ask questions. Any question that they wish at any time that they wish of the GM regarding a specific body of knowledge.
Great technique. I do it all the time, not even in the context of new or returning characters, but yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes.
Right. So recently I used this to help a player who was joining in after the sessions had already been underway, and it was a way of explaining his presence. It was kind of a half love letter, half you get some free questions, where the player characters were in a bizarre place, a dreamland manifest, and he had been there. This was the love letter. He had been there for some time and seen many things and knew that the other player characters were in danger. And he had 3 questions to ask about the dreamland that I would answer truthfully at any time. They were just things that he got to know for free. This was very helpful because the dreamscape is kind of a bizarre place and it doesn't always make sense how it works, at least not to like a rational mind.
A beautiful technique. I love it. I have done this in similar contexts as that. Maybe nothing so weird as a dreamscape, but I have sometimes had players who, let's say I'm running a 5-session dungeon and I have a player who joins us in session 3. Well, that can be a little hard, right? Like you want to, like you said, justify their presence in the party. And if they're in the middle of the dungeon, it can be kind of hard, right? Like how does this person just find you? So I've done a thing like where they've been in the dungeon already, right? They've already been there ahead of the group. They've spent some time there, and I've done that. I'll give them some hold. Like I'll say, you have 3 hold. You can spend it whenever you want to ask me any question you want about the dungeon. And this is kind of an abstraction of their knowledge of the dungeon because they've been there already, which it makes them feel like powerful and special, and it makes the group happy they're there, right? That's
right.
a big part of it too.
Yeah, I mean, beyond just like them having familiarity with like a specific place because they've been there a while, you could use it to abstract knowledge of something that would just make sense that they know about. Like you get into a Cyclesium and your wizard is just going to get 3 hold because they should know something about Cyclesiums without having to necessarily spout lore.
Yeah, every now and then you get a great big fuck all tome book, like an ancient book, that you find somewhere, and it's not as, you could maybe use the book as the justification for a spout lore, but I think it's more interesting if the wizard or whoever's tome it is, if they've spent some time reading this ancient tome, just abstract that out and say, hey, you have some hold here. You can spend this hold to ask me any question you want about a subject associated with the book. It's kind of it's a custom move, right?
Yeah, I think I've done that actually in a Death Frost Doom game where a wizard went into my wizard went into a room, stopped time, and read as much as he could.
Right. Yeah. And so how do you explain that, because it's in some ways like they're returning to the group in a way, right? Like, how do you explain what they, or I should say, how do you account for what they've learned during that time? That abstraction using hold that they can spend is a super good technique.
Right. Like a single spout lore would not be as satisfying as you just get 3.
Exactly. Right. That's kind of the point. It's like a deeper knowledge, right? It's a deeper knowledge than spout lore could give you. I think that's where it comes into play. I've used it for, I've done it often for the, ancient tomes and things like that. I have done it in the context of returning characters, and also characters who are brand new. Returning characters is interesting because with returning characters, I use it as an opportunity to push my friends, right? And I've talked about this in the context of love letters too. It's a similar idea. But what you can do is, okay, you have a character who's not going to be there for session 3, right? Who was there for session 1 and 2 is going to be back for 4 and 5. What you can do is you can say they were in a different part of the dungeon, maybe a really important part of the dungeon that is vital that the characters need to know about. And you can do that. You can give them some hold, and they can spend to ask questions about what they learned while they were off doing their own exploration in the dungeon, right? Super helpful. Pushing fronts. If you're good at it, you can kind of use this technique to subtly push your campaign fronts and adventure fronts, right? Maybe they ask a question and you find an opportunity to give them an answer that is a thing they learn, but it also is advancing your fronts, right? For example, if you had a front where it involves an army getting ready to march on a city, and you have a character who's gone for some reason, or who for some reason has the ability to scout ahead or learn knowledge about this, in some way, and you give them the option of spending these hold to ask questions about it, you can just say, oh, you learned that the army has now reached the village of Farfanel or something, right? And maybe that's one of your campaign fronts, right? Or one of your importance on your front, right? Like the army reaches Farfanel. Like you can kind of do it that way. It's a way of showing like off-screen information sometimes.
Yeah. So I think the 3 major ways that like I see using this is like getting a player who has been absent for some reason or other up to speed and engaged. You can also use it to make an investigation happen a bit quicker. If an investigation is dragging, or if you have a strange landscape like my Dreamscape, a way of making it more manageable for the players.
You could imagine, for example, you have like the classic scene where the wizard gets to commune with a demon, or the priest or the cleric gets to commune with a god, right? They get to learn some things. They have like an extended scene where they get to do that. You can use it here, right? You can give them some hold, maybe 1 hold, 2 hold, whatever you feel comfortable with. And you can let them ask questions that might have been within the god or demon's purview. And then you can kind of answer the questions, and it represents something they learned while they were having this communication. And it makes it so that you don't have to actually have the communication, right? Like, what does it mean for the wizard to have a fucking conversation with a demon? They might not even be speaking the common tongue, right? Like, who knows? It might be an inconvenient thing to do on screen. But with this technique, you can abstract it out and still have it be meaningful.
Yeah, that is a good point, because sometimes it is a little arduous to try and have the scene where he's going back and forth with it. And it's like something the wizard should do is have this extended conversation, but you don't want to take everyone's time to do that.
You can take everyone's time to do that, right? Yeah. I mean, and this kind of goes back to something we talk about a lot just on the show as a general matter, which is the abstraction principle, right? The power of abstraction. If you go back to one of the very early episodes of DR that we did, we talked about using versions of adventuring gear, right? Like ritual implements, 5 uses, medical equipment, 5 uses, fancy clothing, 5 uses. We don't care to see the details of what you found, or to go through the list of details of things you found in the wizard's laboratory, right?
Right. So not until you want to use it.
Yeah, we only care when you get ready to use it. And exactly. And so this abstraction, it's abstraction is powerful in Dungeon World. It's powerful in Dungeon World. I think people should do it in lots of games. I don't think Dungeon World's not the only venue here. But Dungeon World sets a precedent with adventuring gear and things like that, right? So it just kind of goes back to that whole idea too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all that I wanted to say about it.
Yeah, me too.
It's just another great little tool for your toolbox. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here is Useful or Valuable to Me?
Okay, I have dug deep into my magic item vault. This is some old school Jason Dungeon World magic items here, but I thought it'd be fun. I wanted to find magic swords, so I went through my vault and I found a bunch of magic swords for you guys. And we have 3 magic swords, and we're gonna read them off for you today. David, would you like to start with the salamander?
Yeah. So this longsword is crafted with a bronze pommel and has runes etched across the finely weighted blade. The runes, which are rubbed with bronze powder, indicate that this was the weapon of the 7th Lord Helgar Praetor, who was known by the nickname the Salamander. When drawn from its scabbard, a lick of flame leaps from the Salamander's blade. When the first blow you deliver in a battle from the Salamander immediately follows drawing the sword from its scabbard, deal plus 1d4 damage from fire.
So basically, it's just a little cinematic weapon, where you narrate your strike kind of coming out of the scabbard, kind of samurai style, and a little lick of flame comes with it, does a little bit of extra damage, looks cool on screen. That's what the deal with that weapon is. The Sword of St. Murian. St. Murian is a hero from the Age of Occlusion who went to battle with the Yuan-Ti and their serpent god Lalok. For this task, she forged a sword that not only struck fear into the hearts of serpents, but also allowed her to summon and ride one of the race of magical beasts most despised by the snake men, the griffins. The bearer of the Sword of St. Murian cannot be approached by mundane snakes. Magical serpents and serpent-like creatures will be enraged by the sword and will attack its bearer in a wild and reckless manner. Additionally, when you hold the sword aloft and say a prayer to Oron, the god of righteous battle, roll plus charisma. On a 10+, a griffin will arrive by your side almost immediately and give you aid in battle or see you to safety. On a 7 to 9, the griffin will only assist momentarily. On a 6-, Oron finds you wanting.
Now that you mentioned the first two of these, I believe that I have encountered both of them in some long ago Dungeon World.
You probably have, yes. These are old standbys for me. I haven't used them in 100 years, but...
And this last one, I don't think I've seen this last one.
No, this last one, and this last one, I'm excited about this last one because this one's actually super easy to skin if somebody wants to skin it for their campaign. So go ahead, read the Criaxis Bane.
The Criaxis Bane, a fine sword with long green and yellow silk ribbons tied to the handle. The Criaxis Bane is a magical weapon. When the true name of Criaxis is spoken while grasping the sword in your hand, the Demon Lord will appear before you. If you slay Criaxis with the sword, mark 1 XP.
I love this item because it is sword and sorcery as fuck. It is heavy metal as fuck. You've got this sword, you speak the demon's true name, it appears, and you battle it. And if you win, you get an XP. Super sword and sorcery, right? I'm really into it. And also, you can kind of set up a little adventure around it, right? You can have part of the adventure being learning the true name of the Demon Lord Criaxis. Also, you can skin this pretty easily to be whatever evil shit is in your campaign, right? Give them, this sword. It's a quest item that has a little quest associated with it, and it leads up to a big flashy finale.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And that's all we've got, though.
Let's move on to our next segment.
This episode of Discern Realities is being sponsored by Scablands Press and their game The Indie Hack. One of the things we've talked about in the past is how Slade wrote the Indie Hack to be extremely flexible and, well, hackable. His own follow-up game to the Indie Hack, Dust, Fog, and Glowing Embers, uses the system, and I want to tell you about another one that's coming up. Maria Rivera has written a game called Heroes and Crystal Kingdoms, which, by the way, take a moment to clock the acronym. Got it? Great. Heroes and Crystal Kingdoms uses the Indie Hack to tell stories inspired by JRPG video games like Final Fantasy. Characters in Heroes and Crystal Kingdoms are comprised of an archetype and a job. Archetypes are what motivate your character to seek adventure and consist of the classic JRPG fantasy tropes such as the Chosen, the Survivor, and the Amnesiac. Jobs are the package of skills and special abilities that make you effective in the world, and include instantly recognizable things such as the Black Mage, the Monk, and the Mystic Knight. And in keeping with classic Final Fantasy-style video games, you can actually switch your character's job pretty freely. Heroes and Crystal Kingdoms will be available in an upcoming issue of our zine Codex. To check out the Indie Hack system reference document and make your own hack of the game, go to the Scablands Press website. Thanks again to Scablands for sponsoring the show.
Our next segment is What is About to Happen. Listeners, we are going to continue on with our adventure of Saint Evelyn the White, who has been dubbed the Mad Saint in our most recent episode by a young man who was being tackled by his friends to keep him away, as he accused her of all manner of things. And St. Evelyn managed to run away with Venka, who was miraculously freed from her bonds due to a prayer from St. Evelyn, who we've learned is serving a deity who is all about release. St. Evelyn, you are getting closer to Fellbit, where Venka is from. And Venka is hurrying to keep up. She's gaunt, she's not well fed, and this is a little bit of a struggle for her, and she's huffing and puffing. But you've made some good ground. The men have just continued to fight with each other, and it seems like you've gotten far enough away that they've lost interest, at least for now. Hopefully you don't run into them again, because this is kind of the town that they are defending. But you're getting close to it. You can see its walls in the distance, a few brown, scraggly, some black, burned up trees. They haven't collapsed, but they are not bearing any fruit or anything. A palisade looks like it's been recently constructed around it, but you still have a bit of road. And Venka grabs your arm and is like, Hold. I need a minute to catch my breath.
I turn to her and I say, "You seem underfed. No surprise, given the current circumstances of this community." And then I'll reach into my pack and see if I have any rations. And I do, per my gear. And I give her a ration.
Giving her a ration, you can see that her saucer-like eyes just get a little bit wider. And she starts to eat it, then stops and breaks it and offers you half.
I say, No, dear. You eat that. I have more. And in any case, I am nourished by the power of the gods. I'll be fine.
And she takes some of it into her mouth and chews it barely at all, and then swallows it almost immediately. But then she stops again, and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Should we bless it? Is that... I do not know much of the gods."
I think we'll be okay this one time. Tell me, what is your name?
Oh, Venka. I come from this town. I've been trying to help as best I can.
And in what capacity do you serve this town, Venka? I believe that you serve some purpose. The gods have whispered this to me.
Yes, well, I've been trying to keep people healthy as best I can, which is difficult in these times. There's so little food to go around. Oh, and she just keeps eating the food. She is just so relieved that her belly is getting full. But then she takes a minute and she says, "Yes, the gods and your white robes and what the boy said. They forecast that you are Saint Evelyn. And is what the boy said true?"
I suppose many things are said about me throughout these lands. I have something of a negative reputation. And yet, it's not all unearned. I practice a faith that some see as monstrous or cruel, but I view the task that the gods have set before me as a sort of charity, an act of love. No one knows why the gods have chosen to blight this land, and make no mistake, it is the gods that have done it. Not even men, as destructive as they are, can bring about this level of desiccation, carnage, ruination, without some sort of assistance. And I do my best to help those who are caught up in it.
Yes. Well, she continues to eat the food that you have provided her. I am not one to judge on such matters. I know very, very little of the gods and their ways, but if you say it is so, then I suppose it is, and, well, I suppose I owe you a debt for getting me out of that bit of trouble with that lot.
I am not here to collect debts from you, Venka, but I will ask you this. Tell me the lay of this town. I get the sense that there's someone here that needs my particular ministration.
Well, I'm not quite sure that I can tell you exactly that, but I suppose you shall see for yourself. And it is at that moment that you are crossing the threshold, as it were, into Fellbit proper. You are going through the palisade, and I want to know what you see that lets you know that this place would do anything. These people would do everything to keep the enemy out.
The thing that I see that lets me know they would do anything to keep the enemy out is they have strung up their dead in the most disrespectful and sacrilegious manner. Instead of burying them proper, they have instead hung them on the sides of barns, prominent buildings, trees, so as to indicate to anyone marching through that they are a hard, desperate people, that they are so forsaken, and they are so destitute and beaten down. They would treat their dead in this way. It's something of a ghoulish effect, too. It's meant to unnerve. It's meant to make people think that it's a cursed place, that it's an ill-favored place. It has the name of Fellbit for a reason, right?
Yes, and it is as you described, though there is something that you have not quite realized, but you do as you get closer, especially to the palisade, where there are bodies lined along it, and the trees in front of the palisade that have been burned, that, in fact, it looks like some of these bodies have been gnawed on a little bit, like something was eating at them. And some of the bodies are not bodies. They are still alive. They are the very, very sick or the very, very infirm. And they have strung them up out here. That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Discern Realities is a production of The Gauntlet. We can be found in our G Plus community. Just go to the community section of G Plus and search for The Gauntlet. You'll find us there. We are on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. We have a website, gauntlet-rpg.com. At that website, you'll find links to all the various things we do, including podcasts and our zine Codex. And if you like what we do, we would love your support on Patreon, patreon.com/gauntlet.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show.